This episode of Cocktail Theology was recorded in front of a live audience.
So welcome. We are in Elaine's living room. Elaine lives in this beautiful arts and crafts style cottage that's like stone out in the suburbs of Nashville. And it's beautiful and it's serene and it's where we do a lot of things. And so it's only fitting that we would kind of do our first thing here. So many of you have been here and hung out with us here, and so we welcome you tonight. This is basically just a party with a couple of expensive microphones. So I hope you guys will enjoy us talking and being ourselves, because that's exactly what's going to happen tonight.
Yeah, we're not really good at doing anything else, so that's kind of how it's going to have to go. So I think we're there.
Cocktail theology.
It is cocktail theology. Yay. So when we were talking about what to do for the very first one, Benton had the idea of talking about moving on. And for multiple reasons. One is that, we've been talking about the year without fear in some of the stuff we're doing. And a lot of that year without fear, or the year where fear is okay, has to do with knowing when the things that aren't working for you, that it's okay to jettison them. And knowing when it's time to pick up new things. And that kind of sensibility of shift is really core to that year without fear idea. And so we're talking about that. And then, of course, there's always the stuff that we are always doing or not doing that has to do with moving on or not. So you were going to talk a little bit about this whole thing. We're very different on this whole thing.
Yeah, we are. So I'm a very slow processor. And I'm one of those people that will think, hey, it might be cool to do that, or maybe I really should do that, and yet 2 years will pass and I won't have done it. And so I'm kind of one of those that always sort of keeps an eye on the rearview mirror and what's going on over here before I'm ready to actually sort of cut loose and go. So it takes me a while to get there. For instance, it's really hard, particularly with people. It's really hard for me to sort of move on from people that I care about, even if they're not going to leave my life. But if the context of our relationship is going to change a little bit, that can be a little scary for me. So the moving on thing for me is very slow and methodical and sort of wrought, I have to tell you. And that's why I write songs about it, right? Because I'm talking myself into it all the time. I have so many songs. So many. And so it's just like, it's that thing I'm always constantly talking myself into.
So one of the concerts in California last year, I think, no, it was the year before. It was the Redwood City Con.
Yeah.
So he went on for a long time talking about how he writes songs in order to convince himself to do stuff, right? And if you go back and you listen to his CDs with that in mind, it actually just opens up a whole new view of...
You think I'm preaching at you? No, I honestly don't really care about what happens with you. It's all about me right now. It's all about me.
Self-therapy.
Yeah,
exactly. It is.
It absolutely is.
And actually, that's a good time to bring up that he's going to start teaching online and teaching in person as well. And the first course for non-worship leaders is going to be in April. And some of you have probably gotten the blurb about that. But that'll be April 19th and 26th with work in between. And it's going to be songwriting for people who want to, write songs, the song in their hearts. Yeah, so that's coming up. Yeah. Anyway, so...
Yeah, and writing songs for me is very much therapy, so...
Right. But it will be about you if he's teaching.
It will be about you. It will be about you. It will. I promise. It will. It really will. So yeah, moving on. Moving on is can be slow and tedious for me. I don't know how it is for you. It's not really that way so much for you, is it?
It depends on what it is.
Sure.
I think one of the places where we are similar is we connect very strongly with people. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily very many of them, but the ones we connect with, it's like...
Right.
For me, when it involves letting go of a responsibility, mm-hmm. that's hard.
Okay.
Right? My first marriage, I was married for 5 years. And And it was, he was a nice guy. It just wasn't right for all kinds of reasons. But I promised him that I would get him through college, right? Like I would make sure that he got through college. And I realized it was time to go when I was sitting there at his graduation and I went, oh, I'm free. And I went, oh, that's bad.
Wow.
That's probably not good.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And then like a month or two later, I realized I'd dropped like 30 pounds in a couple of months kind of thing because of depression and sad, all of that stuff. It's like, okay, so this actually needs to happen. But you think about that it took that amount of time to come to that, partly because of my responsibility and partly because it just took me time to get there. But once I knew it, it was done. It was over. It was, it was just done. What you said about rearview mirror, I think is really important because I don't have a whole lot of rearview mirror.
Yeah.
I have some, and I have my own issues, obviously. When I think about a situation that I'm in and moving on from it, I'm really clear that that may be better for everybody involved, whether I know it or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's kind of the opposite for me. Because I feel like if I'm moving on, I'm like, putting everybody else in a bind or making everybody else sad or upset at me.
Yeah. And I believe that happens.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the problem with moving on from anything, whether it's a job or a relationship or even, the dumb stuff, is that, in fact, it does affect other people.
Sure.
My own sense of it is if I know it's not working and the other people and I have tried to make that work, the fact is if I leave, it's going to be better for everybody. Right. And so, and as I look back, and I've really thought about this since you decided that this was going to be the topic. So I don't want to lie to people. But I've looked back over all of my everythings, my jobs, people, all of that. And every single time it's been better for the other people. Yeah. Every single time.
Wow.
So I think that recognition that there is something else and that I'm just not that effing important. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's part of it, right? I'll affect people, and I get that, but their lives, that work, is not going to fall apart because I'm not there. And if it does, then they need help that I can't give them.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's part of it.
Well, and kind of bringing this, I think, into the faith realm as we are apt to do.
We are apt.
One of the things that Elane and I have done together is a course called God Ideas, and basically it helps me tremendously when I've been through it twice now. Define or redefine your ideas about God, and it's always eye-opening to folks in the class when they realize what they really do believe about God, right?
Right.
And so, but one of the things that I took away from the first time I went through God Ideas was, when is it time to let old ideas go? Yeah. When is it time to let old beliefs go? Because the thing is, sometimes we hold on to things from, our childhood upbringing, our church history, whatever that is. If you're like me and you grew up in a very kind of fundamentalist, traditional kind of faith church community, it's like you hold on to that, and then at some point you start to feel really, really constricted and unauthentic. And so there came a point where I had to jettison some of that stuff, right? And I think that's part of this too. The moving on is knowing when it's time to let go of some old ideas or some old beliefs or some stuff that just doesn't fit the way you see the world or the way you experience God anymore, or the way you experience. It relates to practically everything in your life.
Absolutely.
Because faith is such an overarching thing. It's like, when your faith basis is flawed in some way, you feel it everywhere, or at least I do.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you start to feel that itchy, constricted feeling, and you're like, I think it's time to evaluate this.
Right.
But unfortunately, too many people don't.
Right.
They don't. And either they abandon faith altogether, or they just continue to shoehorn themselves into a faith system that doesn't work for them anymore. Mm-hmm. And so some of moving on, right, is knowing when it's time
Absolutely.
to let some of those ideas go.
The challenge is that with faith, like with everything else, we don't do that unless we're in crisis.
Right.
Right? If we can basically keep going along, we don't shift paradigms. We don't look for different ways of thinking about things, because you don't know there are different ways of thinking about things until you're in crisis and those things don't work. And then you're looking for new ways of thinking about things. It's like the problem is that when we hit a crisis, whether it's something that's going on in our lives or a pastor or a person of authority breaks faith with us or whatever it is, that it's only at those moments where we have the opportunity, I think, to go, wait, this doesn't fit what I've come to know. And then a couple of things can happen. We talk about this actually. If you haven't downloaded my little paper from our website called The 6 Steps in One Wall,
So good.
It talks about this a little bit. But when we come up against a crisis of some kind, whether it's a crisis of faith or crisis of life, whatever it is, there are only really a couple of things that can happen. One is we run away from it and we go back to old beliefs, whatever the old beliefs were. I mean, it doesn't matter. And then we either engage them or dump them. So, for example, we've talked about this a lot, that I firmly believe that atheists and fundamentalists believe in the same God. It's just this set rejects it, right? That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
When either set of those people comes up against that wall, when they come up into the crisis, their options, and this is true for everybody, it's just more obvious in this case, right? Their option is to go ahead and continue to be an atheist who is feeling weird, or to be a fundamentalist who then either becomes an atheist, right? But with the same view of God. Right? The view of God doesn't change. The view of their lives doesn't change. They just say, oh yeah, well, I don't want that. So that's one of the challenges, right? Is that when we hit that crisis, we can either sort of retreat into what is familiar and be mad at it or itchy by it, or we can say, there's got to be another way of addressing this. There's got to be another way of thinking about this. And if we're really, really lucky and or blessed, I like to call it fortune blessed. If we're really fortune blessed, we find somebody who's got that different perspective, who can kind of just open that up a little bit. Yeah, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And that's true with anything. But I think it's particularly true in what we would call religious or faith life. Everybody has a view of God. Whether you believe God exists or not, you have a view about the God you don't believe exists. Right. So everybody has a view. And the fact is how you view the things that are bigger than you are affects everything about how you view everything else.
Yes, it sure does. Right.
And so you may say, there's no God, but there's still all this that's bigger than you are. So what do you do with that? I think that the challenge is that very often we don't see another way of thinking about things until we, A, are desperate to find another way of thinking about it, and B, find somebody who thinks about it differently, and C, are open to reconsidering. It's like when people come out, right? The stress is, of course, that you'll be rejected by everybody else, right? And the stress for the person who's hearing it is potentially, wow, my view of the world now has to change. Right? It isn't so much, do I love this person or not? It's, my view now of the world has to change. Wow, how do you do that? How do you change the way you think about the world?
It is really easy to stay put in a situation that is tolerable than it is to move past it and do what you have to do to get beyond it. Because there's always risk, right? There's always risk involved. And whether it's people, whether it's income, whether it's, self stuff, which is a large part of this, it's always just really hard. And so, we love the anthems and the songs on pop radio that talk about moving on and grabbing hold of, your destiny and whatever that is. But the truth is that stuff's really hard.
You have a much higher tolerance for tolerable than I do.
I'll agree with you there. I do. I have a pretty high pain tolerance.
You do have a very high pain tolerance.
I do.
No, it's true. It's true. One of the things I really admire about Benton, and that has been useful to me, is that he can persevere, like put his head down and persevere. The capacity to focus and put your head down, which you're much better at than I am, or to keep persisting. Right?
Yeah.
We have different levels of that, and we approach it differently, and so that's always going to be a difference between those. When you're talking with somebody else, that's going to be one of the big differences, regardless of whether you seem to agree on the same things or not. For those of us who come out of the Christian tradition, there is a little bit of shame in giving up on something.
I think that's a Christian thing, but it's also kind of an American thing, too.
If you look at the Bible, which is the thing that most anybody listening to this is going to have in common with us, right, is that it is over and over and over and over and over again a series of moving ons. There is very little sit-stillness. Yeah,
you're right.
I mean, it is, from the time of the fall, where God basically said, okay, that was fun. Get out of my garden now, right? To Abraham, set off. I'm going to lead you to a land. Just kind of go with me.
Yeah.
To, when you're thinking about Noah, or you're thinking about Moses, or you're thinking about any of the prophets. I mean, poor Jonah, right? I mean, Jonah's told to go do this, and he says, oh, no, I'm not doing that, which never works well, right? And then you get to Jesus, who is calling these guys and gals out of whatever they were doing and saying, hey, come along. And they go, okay.
Yeah.
If the Bible isn't a series of moving ons.
Yeah.
Movings on. Moving. I don't know what it is.
Right.
Because it is completely about re-examining and shifting and listening and paying attention and doing the next right thing.
Yeah.
And so often the next right thing means you're not doing whatever it was that you were doing. I think our tradition, this particular tradition, is about moving on. That doesn't mean that you lose who you are, or you lose your tradition. One of the things I try to talk about when I'm talking about conversion experiences with people is that just because you have a conversion experience, or just because you get baptized, or just because of whatever, that doesn't mean you're not you anymore. You still bring you into it.
Right.
And the question is whether you're going to continue to pursue the shift that you had an emotional response to, right? Or whether you're going to say, well, that was cool, and now I've got my ticket, and I can just back up and go do whatever it was I was doing before, right? So you've talked before about when you went to college. You had a particular view of what you were called to do.
Yes. I grew up in a fundamentalist background, as many of you know, and the idea was if you felt a nudge from the Holy Spirit and you were a 16-year-old boy, you were probably called to the ministry. And so my assumption was, as a 16-year-old boy feeling the nudge of the Holy Spirit, that I was called into the ministry. And growing up in the church that I grew up in meant that you went to a particular college and you studied religion with the aim of going to seminary and then becoming a pastor of a local church. And so that became my idea of what my career path was going to be. So I pursued that path. And exactly one quarter in, my very first class of public speaking for pastors or whatever it was, I was like, okay, if I have to become like any of these pompous asses, then I've got this all wrong.
I never get tired of hearing that story.
I promptly dropped my major, and pretty soon after dropped my college and ended up going somewhere else doing something completely different. But that was the idea of what I felt like, when God puts a thumbprint on you, what does that mean? And that could be a whole nother podcast, I suppose. But for me at that point, it was very much about answering whatever that calling was. And I understand calling to be very different now than I did when I was growing up in that tradition. But I did move on from that. And of course, I think at that point in my life, I was probably a little less risk averse than I am these days. But I was, I knew that I had to jettison that. That was not going to work for me. And it didn't take me long to figure out that, because I was already writing songs and I had a band and I was doing stuff, and I was like, okay, ministry can mean a lot of different things.
Hugely.
And at that point, I started to understand that maybe my ministry was more around songwriting and singing songs and worship than it was about preaching or pastoring. So a lot of times it is about letting go of those ideas, right? It's about your experience somehow overpowers what you thought was true. And I think the Holy Spirit, if I can talk in these kinds of terms, I think the Holy Spirit still speaks to us in those ways.
Absolutely.
And many times what the Holy Spirit will nudge us to do, or will encourage us to do, or will inspire us to do, does not necessarily line up with what we thought we were going to do. Even if what we thought we were going to do was like God speaking. Because we mishear God a lot. And so a lot of these kinds of movements, life movements, has to do with identifying what does God really sound like? And many times that means, what do I sound like first? And I have to figure out, if I'm hearing, you need to do this, no, you need to do that, you need to do this, then you need to figure out who's talking and who's on what shoulder. And at that point, you have to figure out what is it? Knowing God, and knowing God is where all this begins, right? Relationship is where all this begins. Knowing God, you have to start to weigh what you're feeling and hearing and thinking against what you know about God and God's character. Right. Would God ask me to do that? God knows me, right? And I know God, and would God ask me to do that? That's the measure. And without that, then you're going to be really confused.
Absolutely.
When your Aunt Matilda tells you, I think God is telling you that you should do this, and Aunt Matilda's been in the church for 99 years, you're going to kind of probably believe her and think, I should probably think about that. But if you really know God and you'd be like, oh, Aunt Matilda's so sweet, I'm going to go do that now. Bless her. She loves Jesus, and she's loved him for 112 years.
Well, I think we should listen to Aunt Matilda.
Of course.
Right.
Of course.
Because a lot of times somebody who knows us and knows God has a perspective that we wouldn't otherwise
have. Right.
I think it's more true for men, and particularly more true for men in the Midwest and the South, that idea that if you have a calling, it is to this thing.
Yeah.
And if you miss it, you will have failed God.
Right? I felt that. I felt that huge. Oh,
right?
Yeah.
That little and it's this kind of slice.
Yeah, tiny.
Tiny. And it's either this or nothing. Yeah, well, that's crap. Mm-hmm. Okay. I truly don't believe that for most of us, and I mean 99.9% of us, that God says this thing in this moment. And if you don't say yes, I'm done with you. I mean, it's nonsense. And I know a lot of preachers preach that. It's nonsense. Okay, so that's the first thing. I think 2 rules are really good when you're thinking about, am I hearing God? Am I hearing... Well, there are 3. This could go on for a while. I could think of 3 that you really have to consider.
Okay.
The first one is never, ever, 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 ever believe anything bad about God. So if God is telling you to do something that suggests that his that God's character is manipulative or unkind or unloving or whatever,
that ain't God.
That ain't God. Second one, third one, whatever, number 1, is that God is never anxious.
Yeah.
Ever. So if what you're hearing is anxiety, it ain't God. Right? God's got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
God's got all the time in the world. And so not so much if you feel anxious, because it's a little different, right, in your responses. But if the sound is anxious, if the voice is anxious, if what you're getting is anxiety or urgency or go do that now, in that bad sense, it ain't God.
No,
all right.
No.
The other thing is particularly if you're given some kind of grand vision.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a great thing to remember if you're looking at people who claim to be authorities. if the grand vision the person is spouting doesn't fit with the general kind of themes of the Bible, not particular verses, because anybody can call out verses and, cite them for any purpose. Sure. But the general themes of God being loving, God being nurturing, God bringing you into better places, blah, blah. If it doesn't fit that, it ain't God.
Right.
So I think thinking of the Bible as being kind of a comparative tool, like a ruler, is helpful.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than just going, oh, well, that person can cite this or that verse. And so those
We've
of you
all been bludgeoned by those verses.
Yeah. Or just, the person cites some verse and it's like you go back and you read and go, well, that wasn't what they were talking about at all. This actually happened the other day where I was like, oh, yeah, no. Yeah, that wasn't what that's about. But awesome. Yeah. We are probably at a break time, I'm thinking.
Okay.
We could do this for weeks.
We could do this for a while, y'all. I mean, you know us, right? Because we did this when you're not watching. We did this last night. We sat on that couch and did this. We do this all the time.
Yes, but I was right last night.
That's true.
We have questions here that may or may not go answered. Okay. So the first one was, will cocktail theology always be filmed before a live audience? No. But the reason is because we really want to make sure that we're putting out, every week or every other week. How did Elane and Benton discover they speak the same language? Was there a moment that you knew?
Wow.
Well, we didn't always.
No, we didn't always speak the same language. I think, okay, so when Elane and I met, I was already on staff there doing worship, and Brandon, Elizabeth, and Elane started attending, and this was about 3 years in. So you have to understand the evolution, I think, of what I was doing. I had been divorced and then come into sort of a fellowship that was open and affirming for the first time. I had come into a group that was fairly diverse theologically. So just like in this room, we had folks that were from very, very diverse backgrounds, right? So it was a different kind of experience for me. And I had never been on a church staff, and I had never been a full-time worship leader. I had led as a lay person at a Southern Baptist church prior to that on occasion, 4 or 5 times a year. So I was way, way, way out of my element on a lot of different levels when I came. So 3 years in, I had figured a few things out, but there were a lot of things I hadn't really figured out yet. And enter Brandon, Elane, Elizabeth. And right away, Elane really took an interest in what was going on spiritually, particularly with me and with Jeremy and with a few of us. And the paradigm started to shift right away. I was very, very hungry for that. What we started doing together instantly broadened my horizons. And it was something that I wasn't aware how hungry I was for until we really started to talk and meet regularly and pray together and things like that. So it didn't take long, I think, for us to find a kinship and for me to start to understand, wow, this is sort of what I've been missing. And so from that has grown, besides our friendship, has grown School for Seekers and cross-training and things that we've done together at Covenant of the Cross and things that we continue to do together, and now this. And it's really just been an outgrowth, really, of those early conversations that started to develop, and for me, started to grow into something very eye-opening and very enlightening, and broaden my sense of who God was, and will be. And that's been tremendously amazing. And it's been one of the most life-changing experiences in my life. So
after I'd been there for a little while, I came off of a church staff. When you're on a church staff, it's a little bit like being a therapist, in the sense that there has to be a little distance between you and your people, a little bit, So I went to him and said, I really want to do this study, and I know what it's like to not be able to relate to other people. And I don't have an investment in your being perfect. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of how that started.
Right.
And then when I got hired on and we started doing the Sunday evening thing, it was just so much fun to do that with you, both because of your incredible gifts and your sensitivity and your difference in background. When thinking about moving on, are there any books, films, etc., that have been helpful on that journey?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot. Some of Brian McLaren's stuff is excellent, especially his early stuff is fantastic for that. Mm-hmm. So Generous Orthodoxy is good.
I love that book.
Yeah, it's a good book. Mary Oliver's poems are fantastic for that kind of, again, that small shift, that little bit.
There have just been a lot of little moments, I think, that have been really, really life-changing for me. Conversations are huge for me.
Yeah.
Huge for me.
Yeah.
Like I should have a tape recorder going all the time when I'm having conversations because I learned so much, both from talking with Elane and other people that I've encountered over my life that have been so influential on me. But
all right, moving on. On some level, that concept is scary, yeah, and lonely. I think that's a great point.
Oh yeah,
just all by itself.
Absolutely.
Is it possible to move on without experiencing those feelings? No, I don't think it is. I think that when we are making a shift in our lives, whatever the shift is, we are very consciously in our own person.
Yeah,
and in your own person is always lonely.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because the deepest stuff that we go through, we have to sort out on our own. We can get help, we can get feedback, but it's like a number of you have experienced death of family members, and you can be surrounded by people who adore you, but you're going to have to, you kind of got to do it on your own. So no, I think that anything that's big at some point has a loneliness to it.
For sure.
And the question is then whether we sit in the loneliness or experience it and recognize that aloneness, notice the change, that aloneness is profound and shapes us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just any kind of big change cannot help but make us become aware that we are interior. And although we're connected to everybody, we're separate in a particular way too. And in those crisis moments, in those moments where we're making decisions, there's that sense of, this is defining who I am in a new way.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it can be. I do think that if we approach change with an awareness of our fear, but not being throttled by the fear, then there's the possibility of looking and saying, oh, but this could, and this might, and what would happen if, right? So that shift. One of the things that has struck me in massive change is how sometimes it'll bring about great changes you never expected to have. I'm thinking about particularly, like if you lose a family member or you have a divorce or something, which is just so excruciating. But then something else shifts and maybe you talk to somebody you haven't talked to in a long time, or the air gets a little lighter, or people start showing up who hadn't shown up. Can you give an example of the reward that comes from moving on?
God's on the other side.
Yep, absolutely.
That's for me, the thing that I continue to discover is that when there's this daunting thing that I need to move past, then God is on the other side of that. There's always a place to land. Even if you fail, there's still a net. God is always on the other side.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that you have to remember. I think regardless of how big the risk, regardless of how you foul it up, I continue to be surprised and comforted by how present God is, both in the decision and also in what happens after. I think that's the upside of moving on for me.
So I've thought a lot about the move here over the years, because the first year was hell for me, because it was such a shift, and my identity kind of went bye, but I wouldn't have had you or him, and I wouldn't give that up. It was not a fun year. I don't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't have had this. So there's always something good that comes out of moving on. Being in that place where a change is happening and that you are moving on, but you don't know to where or how, and there's no clear plan.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
So there all the time. Daily. That's Tuesday for me. Pretty much every Tuesday.
Oh, what about letting go of past resentments? Cannot recommend therapy enough. I am dead serious.
Yeah.
I am dead serious. Having somebody to talk to who is not invested in the outcome is huge. I'm just going to continue. What if something sounds good in theory, you're comfortable in your skin or job or whatever it is, and someone comes along with what you knew would be better for you, but you're not feeling it sure if it is? You pray to God about it, and your head fills up with a big, pretty picture, but you go nowhere. What do you do with the fear of moving on? That's a fantastic question. I think that's a fantastic question. Unless you're an Enneagram 7, which is kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, this comes up, right? If you're not the kind of person who's always looking for the next great thing, this is going to come up. I think that a lot of us are prone to guilt, and we're always going to be prone to guilt. That's going to be our kind of defining sin, if you will. Sin, using a very broad sense of sin there. We are going to go to guilt. When we're scared, we go to guilt, right? If you are the kind of person who, when you're scared, you go to guilt, you are going to go to guilt. That's going to happen. The question is then what you're going to do about it. One of the things I really don't like about Jesus is
I love sentences that start that way.
One of the things I don't like about Jesus is Jesus makes it very, very clear that to move on to the next thing, you have to let go of the last thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That language of you have to hate your mother and father. It's not about actually hating your mother and father. It's about being willing to walk away from your mother and father.
Exactly.
And embrace a new reality, embrace a new family, embrace a new whole thing.
Right.
That's awful.
Yeah.
There are times when that's just awful.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think that is always the challenge, right?
Yeah.
And at least for me, I tend to go to shame rather than guilt, which has a little different texture. For me, it's about getting the compelling vision. Do I have a compelling vision? Am I escaping from something that's painful or bad, right? Which you just sometimes have to get out of. Or am I going towards a vision? And if I have a vision, usually means I need to figure out what to do about it and how to either bring people along or adapt or connect. Both developing spiritual maturity, and what I mean by that is that sense that your core is stable. You know who you are, and you're going to be that person comfortably. It's a particular kind of humility, but that sense allows you to move in a whole bunch of ways. I think for me, if I'm trying to make a decision, one of the things that I do when I've kind of gotten to this point, I don't know really what to do, is I pick one and I start praying, God, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray to you for a couple of weeks about that this is what I'm going to do. If you don't want me to do this, put a roadblock in front of me. And God has. There have been times where I've thought I was going to do something and there was the roadblock and I was like, oh, gotcha. God doesn't want you to get stuck. God's about moving on. God does not want you to get stuck. What do you do with the fear of moving on? Hang out with people who know you really, really, really well and can make you laugh. We have one that's you get into that position where you remain in things that are tolerable because it's too good to leave it, but too bad to stay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Where you're looking at it and going, okay, well, it's not horrible.
Right.
I mean, I'm not drinking myself to death and I'm not getting beaten up, so clearly it's okay.
In one of my jobs right now, I'm recognizing that it is having a
deleterious effect.
A very negative effect on my health, physically and mentally and emotionally. Okay, this is probably the most challenging job I've ever had, and so I'm recognizing that this is a job that I need to find a way to let go of, and yet the money's like all of you. Money's good enough, right? And so it allows me certain freedoms and certain opportunities and things like that. But I have to recognize that I'm getting daily headaches and I'm needing massages regularly and therapy regularly. And so when do you say enough to that, even if leaving that means you're not exactly sure what's on the other side in terms of how I'm going to pay my car payment or, in very practical ways. I can say spiritually, God has always been on the other side and God will be with me. Even if I can't make my car payment, God will be with me. Absolutely. Now, there is not assurance that I'll be able to make my car payment.
Right.
If God is with me, that does not mean that I'm going to make my car payment.
Right.
But it means that God will help me through the fact that I can't make my car payment.
Absolutely.
So it's like you can't expect that things are going to be rosy on the other side when you don't know what you're jumping into. But you can't expect that God will be with you to manage whatever it is that you have to deal with on the other side. Why is that hard? I don't know. But sometimes it is when you're looking at a ledger and you're figuring out your budget and you're figuring out, here's what I have to make at the end of the month. I'm going to be X $1,000 short at the end of the month. What do I do with that? And yet, if I stay in the situation I'm in, it hurts me in these ways, and it damages in these ways. That's a tough space.
So just a couple of things. I believe that chapter 7 is a gift from God. That is, if you have to declare bankruptcy to get out from underneath a weight that is causing you to be unwell or to have guilt about stuff that you have no business having guilt about, then chapter 7 is a gift from God. Okay? We have so much shame around stuff that it can really prevent us from noticing that there actually is a way out of something. So number one. So the reality is if you couldn't pay all your bills, you declare chapter 7, you move on, you can't get a credit card for a while, so what? Okay. That's the first thing. Second thing is remembering that you actually have people around you. And again, I think part of that, is we're reared to be so independent. No one is independent. If you went to the grocery store, you are not independent. Okay? So that illusion has to go away. We are not independent. The fact is we depend upon people all the time. The question is whether we want to acknowledge that and actually depend upon them for stuff that matters. If you are truly being destroyed by it, you are no good to anybody. You may feel guilty about changing it, but you're no good to anybody if you're being destroyed. Anything else before we move on? Speaking of moving on.
Did we cover all the questions?
I think we covered all the questions. I'm sure there are more, and now people are wondering, what did I mean about that? About hell? We need to thank all of you guys again.
Sure do.
Not just for paying to be here tonight or being here tonight, but for the incredible notes of support and encouragement and such that you all have been giving us. That's a gift from God.
Sure is.
So thank you for that. Get onto our mailing lists, please. We're going to be kind of pulling back from Facebook because Facebook is a really challenging way to get to people. If algorithms alone cause that problem. So please get on our mailing lists. You can do that by going to bentonstokesmusic.com, ElaneO'Rourke.com, schoolforseekers.com, all those .coms, theyearwithoutfear.com. Basically, I have taken over the .com world. But seriously, but that's going to be the best way to follow what we're doing. I do spiritual counseling and spiritual coaching. He does songwriting, all that stuff. But I'm going to say one more thing about this. Our deepest dream for you is that you are whole and free.
Yeah.
And free is in here, not out here.
Yeah.
If we can help you get there, we want to do that. Mm-hmm. If we can't, we want to help you find somebody who can. So that's our goal, is to help you be whole and free. or to help you find somebody who can help you. Yeah. So we need to say thank you to all of y'all, because you are the reason we're doing this. Not only just your support over the last 3 years that we've been doing stuff together, but your support in this particular endeavor has meant so much to both of us. So, okay, here's where I do the romper room thing. We ready?
Yep.
So I want to thank Allie and David and Dan and Victor and Tracy and Claudette and Kat and Eric and Marie and Liz and Carly and Tennyson and Elton and Melissa and I'm guessing Heather. Anybody else out there with you guys?
Lyndon's here.
And Bran, my husband, and Lyndon. There we go. I can't see everybody, so I have to kind of do this. So, but thank you so much. Oh, and thank you, Ashley, for video equipment.
Yes, Ashley McKinney. Thank you.
So, there we are.
There we are.